In 2017, I encountered a video series on YouTube called The War on Truth. The producer of the series was a ministry simply called The Fuel Project. The War on Truth provided me with a unique framework to view the culture war, because it viewed it as a war between two virtue types, a war which began long ago as a result of the corruption within the Roman Catholic Church. During the early and middle medieval periods, the Roman Catholic Church controlled all knowledge and what was thought of by the people. But as more and more people gained understanding of the Bible and it was made into their own language, the corruption and deceit of the Roman Catholic Church became well known. Thus, society began to pursue truth and knowledge, believing that if it was a lack of these things that got them into the mess, then a fulfillment of these would prevent them from happening again. But as the 1950s drew to a close and the 1960s opened up, a new counterculture movement had begun. This generation had seen the increase of power in the atomic bombs and had learned from first-hand accounts of what it was like to serve in the Second World War. This generation only wanted a peace that would last, and believed it would come from the embracing of love, since they perceived the last war to have been caused by too many truth claims, and thus a lot more of a live and let live mindset was developed. In addition to the new mindset of rebellion against the old ways and the spreading of the free love movement, which was also growing in popularity. These things all came to a head in 1967's Summer of Love, where the ideas were rapidly propagated and spread throughout the country as people came and left the gathering. Mark, who created the Fuel Project, began researching this topic in 2013 after he'd spoken at a conference and vaguely talked about the idea of God having two different virtue types, hard virtues and soft virtues, which are gauged by how easy or difficult they are to deal with in our own lives. Since then, he has expounded on this subject by producing more series dedicated to culture war. In one of those series, he describes our current cultural landscape as a post-truth society, which means objective truth is so often discarded in favor of not offending anyone or causing emotional discomfort. One prominent example of how far our society has drifted away from truth is Bill H.R. 5 of the United States 117th Congress, which was from 2021 to 2022. This bill was labeled the Equality Act, but when I read through it, I discovered that it would redefine the legal protections against discrimination against sex to include gender identity. This meant a man could claim that he identified as a woman and walk into a woman's bathroom, changing room, women's only section of the spa, such as a sauna, participate in female sports, and the owners of these facilities or the orchestrators of these events are legally forbidden from stopping this. Among the legislation, it was included that they would ban what was labeled as conversion therapy, or as some people will mockingly say, pray the gay away. The conversion therapy, I believe, will be better defined as encounter therapy, for it is a place and time where people seek to God in order to overcome the attraction, confusion, or even underlying trauma that has messed with their mental states. There are testimonies of people who've gone through times of suffering and internal emotional struggles. Mark Fairley of the Fuel Project has made several videos where he points out an interesting correlation between emotional trauma in the developmental years and the top well-known openly gay celebrities. He calls this correlation simply the trauma theory. Because there's an increased focus on the feelings of people, they're being denied the truth that can prevent harm. One example of the harm that can come from denying truth is the gender change surgeries, which mutilate and carve up the body to change the way they look to conform to an internal delusion, which is a fixed belief completely distant and detached from reality, such as genetics is what determines whether you're a man or a woman, not your body and the way it looks, and not the way you feel in your mind. But the end result is healthy body parts being removed from healthy bodies, causing harm to the person. A quick thing I want to note is that when I first wrote this podcast episode in the beginning of 2022, Jonathan Cahn's book Return of the Gods hadn't come out yet. When I read the book in 2023, I learned that one of the old demonic forces in the ancient world was Ishtar. She was responsible in their mythology for removing it from the boundaries of marriage between one man and one woman, responsible for same-sex attraction, having the power to change people to the opposite sex, and she was noted as being violently hostile to any who would resist her. In addition to reading the book, I also watched an interview by Michael Knowles, who interviewed a priest and exorcist who was working, among other things, at one of these camps that was designed to help people counteract the same-sex attraction or the transgender belief spiritually by addressing those topics in that way. One of the accounts that the exorcist gives to Michael is that they had a man believing he was a woman and that he belonged as a woman and was improperly created. So among the things they did to help him challenge this irrational belief was visualize God forming him in the womb. They spoke about all the hands, the feet, the arms, the legs, and then when they got to the part where God forms the genitalia of him as a boy, a demon manifested and was trying to resist them. This resulted in the priest and the exorcist casting the demon out of the man, who was able to then undergo the full visualization process without the hindrance or aversion that was caused by the demon. I find this interesting since it leads credence to the theory by Jonathan Cahn, who is a Messianic Jewish rabbi, and the person Michael Knowles interviewed, who was a Roman Catholic priest. The fact that these two people on seemingly opposite ends of the spectrum in the Christian world came to the same conclusion indicates there might be something to this theory. When the priest spoke about what caused the man and talked about the personal history of the man, it was revealed that this man was the first child of his parents, but that he was an illegitimate child, and the second child was a legitimate child after his parents were married, and this was a girl. Because the girl got all the doting and attention from his father, he began to believe that in order to be loved and accepted, he had to be a girl, and this is what the demon took advantage of in order to get control over him and a leg in, the abandonment and the hurt in his soul. As I consider that there is a potential spiritual side to this, and I'm willing to say that there truly is a spiritual element to it, I'm not surprised that there is a pressure for us to conform to the lies, specifically when you consider that Christians are meant to be embodiments of truth when we proclaim ourselves to be servants of Christ, who boldly declares in John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And if we were to deny that, we would deny him. After I wrote Welcome to the Armory, I learned a lot more about the Roman army and military in the years to come. One of these things was that the Roman military belt, also called the belta or cingulum militare, they learned that they had to wear it at all times, because this belt was a display of their position and enabled others to recognize them. A modern comparison would be how cops are asked to wear a badge and a gun on them at all times when they leave the house, regardless of being on or off duty. When Paul wrote to the Ephesians in chapter 6, verse 13, and he tied the truth to the belta, he would make people understand in their day and age just how closely tied truth is to our identity as Christians, and that we must walk in this way of life of truth in the same way Christ is and embodied it. The image I drew for today's post is a majestic crown contrasted by a crazy man in a straitjacket, and that's because of what answer we must give to the question of who Jesus is. In his book, Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis provides us the three conclusions that we are left to draw on when we ask the question of who Jesus was or is. Either he was telling the truth, and thus he is the Lord, the ruler of all, for he is God. He is a liar who is saying things just to draw a crowd to himself, as there have been many such figures in history, or he was a lunatic who was lying and saying things crazy, but because he himself was crazy, he believed them as truth and thus had the confidence to say and do as he was saying. Among the main things that helps give credence to the Lord or lunatic options is that when Jesus told people their sins were forgiven, he acted as if their actions against the other people were actions against him personally, and that is why we must ask, was he God or was he a lunatic? Because in the Jewish tradition, that God was the God who cared about each individual personally and would thus identify harm against people and individuals as harm against himself. This is why when he said, I forgive you, as if the harm against someone else was harm against himself, was him calling he was God, adds to the whole question of is he God or is he a lunatic believing he's God? And that is why the saying that and that is why saying Jesus was a good moral person or a good moral teacher falls apart, because the act of forgiving other people their sins in the Jewish Hebrew culture was paramount to proclaiming yourself as the I am that revealed himself to Moses at the burning bush and led the people by day as a cloud and at night as a fire. A good moral teacher must be an example of his morals. If he was saying these things falsely, he'd be a hypocrite not worth following. But since he never repented of those statements, the logic of him being a good moral teacher brings one to the place where you must say he is telling the truth or he is lying, and then the statement of being a good moral teacher about Jesus is false, and everything he says should be rejected, for he cannot keep himself moral according to his own standards. But if his teachers are good and moral, then why are they good and moral? In order to maintain internal logic and consistency about his moral adherence, we are left the conclusion that he is exactly who he said he is, if we want to believe that he is moral. Otherwise, we are left to believe that he was nothing but a deceiver and false prophet, or a lunatic. To wrap up these two seemingly disconnected parts of this blog post, I want to quote the words of James, Paul in his letter to the church in Rome, and Jesus' words recorded in the Gospel of John. James writes to the scattered church, "Don't be deceived, my dear brothers and sisters. Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. He chose to give us birth through the word of truth, that we might be a kind of first fruits of all he created." And Paul to the Romans says, "They exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. Amen." And then Jesus spoke to the Jews, saying this: "To the Jews who had believed him, Jesus said, 'If you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciple. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free.'" Mark's whole series was to identify the problems which come when we reject only half of who God is, when we embrace one set of virtues at the expense of the other. In Mark's list, he has love, grace, kindness, mercy, and forgiveness as the soft virtues, while the hard virtues are truth, justice, righteousness, and holiness. When we have a God in our mind that only embodies one set of virtues, we get a created thing like Paul describes, and that is not a complete picture. People will gravitate to a distorted image of God that best embodies the type of God that they want in their lives. If they want a God that will not do anything against them, then the God who mostly embodies the soft virtues will be the one they have. But if they want a God who needs everyone to be perfect and provides a way to earn salvation, then the hard virtues will become the ones that your God manifests and embodies. We will also see this impact the way folks treat others, because the idea of God that they have in their minds impacts the way they act and those around them. When people reject the God of the Bible, or Yahweh, they will make their own by mixing and matching these virtue elements to create something that appeals to them. There are several downsides of not having a solid truth to rest on, but they all stem from a key factor, and that is uncertainty. If you've read Welcome to the Armory, then you will know that the virtue of peace follows the truth in Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12, because it, that is peace, is the result of being grounded in the truth, and that is why Paul tied the virtue to the military boots of the Romans, boots that were meant to provide a soldier with a good grip on the ground beneath them across every terrain they encountered. And this applies beyond just the personal lives we lead to include the national level. If sources of information cannot be trusted, then the stability of that nation will falter, and the order which existed due to trusted institutions being dedicated to truth will begin to fade. The only way in which order will be restored is by the re-emergence of truth as the dominant force. Those who fight to preserve and restore truth where it is fading away will unknowingly be working within the blessing of Christ, because he stands for the truth and will support those who defend it. But when Christ is allowed into the process openly, there comes a different type of truth that is tied to the spiritual reality of our world. When this truth is made known and championed, it will cause deeper change in the hearts of those who listen, because this truth is about morality and what happens to us when we die. deep questions that as humans have always grappled with to know the answer to. But some people will reject it because of the impacts that it has on us, for it demands that we change in accordance to the revelations of heaven, hell, and our inherently sinful nature that we cannot fix on our own. We need objective truth in our society to be allowed to flourish and spread, but it needs to be tempered with love in the same way Christ dying on the cross showed how they are to be kept in balance. The cross condemned sin, and the penalty of death was carried out, but due to love, he took the spot which we were meant to have. We need objective truth that says there are only men and women, that you cannot change from one to the other, but that there is an underlying problem causing this disconnect from reality, which is what should be treated so that they can be mentally healthy again. People need to be allowed to say certain ideas bring about bad results, other ideas bring about good results, and then ask why these ideas have outcomes that are of this nature without worrying about being canceled or banned from the public forums online. For the national level, we need to have things reported with as little bias as possible so that the emotions that often override rational thought don't get involved. In the same way, a lack of truth and transparency causes doubt and mistrust to be sown and thrive. The reemergence of these things will enable a return to stability. To arrive at the end destination of society that holds both virtues in proper balance will require effort, prayer, and dedication. But I believe it is possible to have happen if God is permitted to work within every aspect of society. Until next time, courage and Godspeed.